really, really honored to be here today. I would not have missed this for the world. Nigel, everyone has come and said what a fantastic mentor Nigel was. Nigel absolutely was that for me, a mentor for me, but he also was, I mean, I have to be honest, there was a point where I absolutely was going to leave the epi department at MSU, and Nigel and Hossein actually stepped in and said, "You're not leaving, you're staying." And they literally took me under their wing, and I had a phenomenal experience because of Nigel. Hossein left. So it was because of Nigel, and I am forever grateful for everything that he did. So I just want to say thank you publicly. Again, I've said this before, but I want to say it again. Thank you publicly for your mentorship. I also want to say one of the things that Nigel and I have in common, we look so much alike, totally similar interests in work. One of the things that Nigel and I have in common is our love for history and how it impacts health now. So I'm really excited to speak with you. Everybody ran over. I mean, what time do I? Okay, all right. So everybody ran over. I'm really excited to speak with y'all about applying an equity lens, a health equity lens at the intersection of health and capital. And I don't mean like Lansing capital, I mean like money capital, which is something we don't tend to talk about in epi and health. So I'm really excited to speak with y'all about this. So I'm Pirtle Tyler again, she, her pronouns. I'm the Chief Health Officer at RIA Ventures. Ventures. We were founded in 2018. We have 4 strategies to advance reproductive and maternal health. Impact investing is the first one. I'm going to talk to y'all about that and how epi is related to that. I'll also talk to you about our ecosystem building work, which is another portfolio that I work on. We also do corporate engagement and narrative and storytelling. So first I'll start with some background. We've seen a lot of data. We've seen the numbers. We've seen the citations. People, I think, saw this in the news a couple months ago. There was information about maternal morbidity and mortality all in the news. Usually we don't see health outside of COVID on the news. So this was a pretty big deal for those of us who are repro epidemiologists, maternal health epidemiologists. And the thing that was there were several things that were striking. First, that it hit the news, that all this was going on. Second, the racial disparities. Black mothers, Black and brown mothers, 2 to 3 more times more likely to die. The other thing that hit the news was that about 80% of these deaths were preventable. And for the lay public who doesn't really think about public health, that was pretty shocking. So couple this with the recent Dobbs decision that overturned 50 years of precedent for abortion comprehensive healthcare access, we've got ourselves in a bit of a mess when it comes to reproductive and maternal health. So I would argue, and I hope y'all wouldn't argue against me, that you would argue alongside me, that a number of these poor maternal health outcomes are not inevitable, but they're the result of laws, policies, institutional practices that can be changed. And I would argue, and Nigel might argue alongside me as a historian in this space, that our complex history in the United States with race, reproduction, and capital has also really led to a large number of the negative health outcomes for women and other birthing people, specifically of color. So this table from I think this was this was maybe 2018, 2019. It's kind of a busy slide, so I'm going to walk you through it. It shows the historical and contemporary sexual and reproductive health care related experiences of people of color in the United States. On the very far, what is this, left? Yes. On the very far left side, you'll see the period. It goes from the period of slavery all the way up to post-civil rights. So this is 400 years of history in the United States. Second column shows the time span, so the period of years. The fourth column shows the personal experiences that individuals dealt with respect to their reproductive health. And then the last column shows the healthcare experiences that individuals dealt with. So for example, during periods of slavery, personal experiences included public, nude, physical auctions, rape for sexual pleasure and for economic purpose. And I think this piece about economic purpose is important, and it plays into what I'll speak about in the future. There were a number of non-consensual gynecologic surgeries. We have a number of MDs here, J. Marion Sims, for example, non-consensual gynecologic surgeries for health, but also for economic benefit, and not the benefit of those who receive these non-consensual surgeries, but for the benefit of others. Moving down to Jim Crow, Again, rape, lynching, generational poverty, moving across to the healthcare experiences, non-consensual medical experimentation continued on. We all have heard about the Tuskegee syphilis study, but there was also compulsory sterilization. And if we move all the way down to post-civil rights, non-consensual sterilization is still happening today. A number of us in this space heard about it happening in Georgia for people who are coming across the Mexico border. So this long history of reproductive health, it's not to say that these things happened a long time ago, they're happening now. And this is just a graphical representation of the prior table. The huge green turquoise part, that part is slavery. The little small purple part that you see here, this is post-civil rights, very small point in our time period. So when we think about historical context and how it plays into health, we can see that we're not that far removed from the worst of it, and it's still happening right now. And if folks are interested in reading more, got a number of books that I can refer you to. I would encourage you to share them with your EPI students. If you don't, share them with them now. A lot of really good writing here. So all of this historical context aside, the question is, what is the role of capital in advancing health equity? Because that's what we're really here to advance. We want to understand history and its impact, but we want to understand history to use it to move forward and advance health for people who have been historically marginalized. So here comes the venture space. All the heavy aside, here comes the venture space. There's a women's health market that's really primed for innovation and investment. And the numbers that are up on the board are big numbers. These aren't small numbers. These aren't million, these are billions. So the US market spends about $100 billion on maternal health. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. $47 billion are spent on maternal health complications in the US. A lot of money. Pharma research, $200 billion spent each year, but only 1% of that is spent on women's health. Not to mention the health disparities and health equity, only 1% is spent in women's health. And there's an additional 4% on oncology. So this is women's health outside of oncology. When we think about venture capital, so new investments in health technology, $36 billion, it's a lot of money. But only 2% of that is spent on women's health, not to mention the things that are spent on health equity. So going back to that original slide where we talked about maternal mortality, maternal morbidity, health disparities, how they're increasing, there really isn't a lot being done in terms of investment to affect these issues. And this is just like a point of comparison. The entire NIH budget, including external funding and internal staffing, was $45 billion. So comparing those numbers to this fairly small number, half, for the entire NIH budget. So what we know is that the status quo isn't working. We really need innovation, and we need innovation that's pushing towards equity. And that's the work that I'm really excited to do now with my EPI degree. And so I took a walk on the wild side. I took a walk on the venture capital side, and I'm focused on pushing capital and money towards causes and interventions that really advance reproductive and maternal health equity. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. We have a fund. We really focus on early and growth stage companies that are primed to drive equity. Here are some examples of the companies that we invest in. They're focused on reducing unnecessary C-sections, increasing non-hormonal contraceptive options, contraception for men, early stage cancer diagnosis, access to all sorts of care. And the purpose of putting this slide up is to say, these are interventions that had some NIH funding, but NIH funding wasn't enough to actually bring them to the market. So you kind of do research, you create interventions, you have an intervention that works, you study it, it works, and then you can't really do anything with it because you don't have the funding to push it out into the broader market. That's where types of capital like venture capital come into play to move some of these incredible interventions that researchers create out into the market to make sure that they're able to be used by the general public. So we have understanding of historical context, we have understanding of the market in terms of financing that's out there, and we have understanding of some pretty awesome interventions. NIH said they work, they funded them for RCTs. Now we need to make sure that these things that we're doing are advancing equity. And I would argue that healthcare, science, innovation, policies, capital, none of these things are neutral. You can't just say we're creating this thing and if we put it out there, it's going to do good. If you're not intentionally advancing equity and centering equity in the work that you're doing, what you're doing is causing harm. And what you're doing is causing more unequal access and inequitable outcomes. So with that in mind, the work that we do at RIA is partly innovation and partly investment, but it's also pushing towards an equity framework. So what we created was this reproductive health equity learning continuum that takes companies who are creating these products and it takes investors in this broad venture capital space, and it challenges them to move their work, their investments, their products towards equity. And we start with the perspective of companies where they're kind of equity blind, where they say, I created this product and it works, so it must be doing pretty well in the field, right? No, sweetie. If you're not intentionally trying to move forward on an equity perspective, it's going to do more harm. It's going to cause more unequal outcomes. So we take organizations, investors, companies, for-profit, nonprofit, and we move them from this equity blind perspective all the way to an equity focused perspective, which is more intersectional. It considers historical context and it incorporates equity into the systems and structures. And we do this by focusing on 10 equity indicators, everything from organizational policies, company policies, investment policies, down to accountability mechanisms. So who's in the decision-making table? If you have an organization, who's on your board? If you're creating a product, did you have people from the community involved in that process? Did they have the ability to say, no, that doesn't work for our community? Or did you just go and speak to them when you wanted to market to them and sell in the broader field? So this is the work that we're doing in advancing equity. This is how we merge capital and health. And I think that's it for that work. In closing, I just wanted to say it's really, really important to not only consider historical context, but consider power dynamics and systems and structures and how they cause inequitable outcomes. As public health practitioners, we shouldn't just focus in our own silos. We should reach across aisles, gaps, fields to really see how we can contribute to the broader field. Because if we're only talking to ourselves, it's great, but also we should try to speak with others who maybe have different perspectives, put our brains together to move the field forward. And then finally, again, in closing, as I started, a huge thank you to Nigel, who knew from the first time he met me, I probably wasn't going to be an academic researcher, but who was very, very, very supportive in whatever career path I decided to take, and who's always been my largest cheerleader. So thank you again, and thanks y'all.